long time ago, when life was simpler, boxing was more complex. Boxers were just tougher because they showed more technique and finesse. In fact, every boxer was an ATG because every fight went 15 rounds. It was an era of pure boxing because only Americans were champions, because only Americans were able to compete. In that time, we had the art of positioning. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Give the video a like, comment, sub. Check out my Patreon, Cash App, buy me a coffee, you know the deal. As you could probably tell, my favorite YouTube snob made a video entitled Lost Art of Positioning, where he bemoans the fact that they don't make them like they used to. And, well, you'll see. Let's just get into it.
Seeking advantageous positioning has largely become a lost art.
So as you just heard, the central thesis of Boxing Gyms' very educational video is that boxers used to be able to position themselves so much better than today, which is a very odd and anachronistic view of boxing, because even in his own video, the practitioners of this supposedly lost art are primarily modern boxers. And the more complex some of these positioning techniques get, the deeper we go into the video, the fewer old school boxers we see. And once the technique reaches its peak, there are none. So not only does he fail to prove his central thesis, he seems to be proving the exact opposite. The logical or chronological progressive improvement of boxing technique.
Your positioning in relation to your opponents can be advantageous by maneuvering left or right. If the opponent were to match your exact movement at the same time, then everything will remain equal. So for the end positioning to become advantageous, you need your opponent to stand still while you move. The best way to freeze an opponent is with offense or the threat of offense.
So this is what people like myself have forever called getting to the spot first, or setting traps, or keeping your opponent off balance, or being first, or stopping and dropping when your opponent is not ready, or punching from your boxing stance when your opponent is out of position, or catching your opponent when, for example, his feet are crossed up or he's making some other similar mistake. I could probably think of 10 other ways of describing this. So this isn't some long lost ancient Mayan secret. This is good old boxing that Boxing Gyms is merely repackaging and reselling to you, perhaps better than anyone ever had. And his presentations being laden with mostly original jargon make old concepts seem like something new, especially to those not in the know, his students. So I watched the whole video and I thought to myself, how is it that Triple G, who had demonstrated all of the techniques showcased in the video, is nowhere in the video, but Ali, who is in the video demonstrating only the basis of this technique, or the most basic variation thereof, was somehow the purveyor of positioning? And the implication, at least, is that he was one of those guys who displayed some high levels of this art that by now is by and large lost, right? So while it would be very easy to demonstrate Triple G executing all of these techniques in the boxing ring, with Ali, insofar as we can tell, only doing the basics, and with only that evidence on the table, you'd have to concede that Triple G was far more advanced than Muhammad Ali, at least insofar as the lost art of positioning is concerned, right? But I'm going to challenge myself and I'm going to show you how David Lemieux, who was at least one level below Triple G, knew more about positioning than Muhammad Ali, thereby also providing more evidence that this isn't some lost art, but that today's fighters know more about positioning than someone like Muhammad Ali did.
Jabbing to the opponent's strong side or towards your weak side is the quickest route to advantageous position. If the opponent freezes while defending or getting hit with the jab, on the completion of the step, you achieved a position where you're still bladed in a boxing stance and your opponent is perpendicular or square, opening up a lane for the now aligned rear hand. I call it the open T position, where you're the bladed stem and your opponent is the square top of the letter T with space in between, which is very important. Due to being squared, the defensive system your opponent is using now has holes, and at the same time, their ability to rotate the hips to generate power has been drastically diminished.
So basically stick and move around your opponent until they're squared or sufficiently out of position where they can't generate enough power to threaten you, and make sure you remain in position to punch, and then punch. Look at David Lemieux's back leg as he changes levels just a little bit and throws that jab. He steps over to his left while leaning over to the right to disguise that he's moving to the left, straightens out and throws a right hand to the body with his opponent squared. So he is sticking and moving, but unlike Ali, mostly in. And because he's leaning over to the right as he's simultaneously stepping over to the left, his head stays in the same slot. So his opponent is happy to go straight back because he thinks he has him lined up and is just biding his time. Lemieux's triple jab makes Stevens close up his stance, square up, and he gets cracked to the midsection as Lemieux is bladed and Stevens is the top of the tee. The art of positioning isn't lost, it's hidden so that the opponent can't see it, and apparently boxing jams can't either. Here Lemieux varies the same technique. Behind one hard blinding jab, he steps over to his left and straight forward as he moves his head over to the right, then takes his head off the line of his opponent's punch and hits him with a right hand over the top. The reason why this works is because while his opponent is moving straight in, Lemieux is moving around him and forward. So while Stevens isn't out of position to punch, he's punching at air and Lemieux has him lined up. So you don't have to be perpendicular to your opponent. You bladed, he squared in order to gain advantageous positioning. Doing it this way is a lot more efficient. It's a lot more subtle, thus harder to see for everybody. Here, both boxers set at the same time. Only Lemieux takes a hard step over to his left, so it's no longer equal positioning, and he uses the left hook to further position Stevens in line for that right hand. So Lemieux's level change disguises the hard step over to the left and it freezes Stevens, and this left hook squares him up a lot more by forcing him to put more weight on his left foot. So Lemieux creates this T formation a lot more efficiently than Muhammad Ali, and he accomplishes this with complexity. This is how you refine an advanced technique. Here Lemieux uses small steps over to his left, but primarily his left hand power, some shoving and controlling to position Stevens as the top to his T. While these aren't the methods that boxing gyms describes, this is positioning and the end result is the same. The difference is that not only are you putting yourself in an advantageous position, you are literally moving your opponent where you want him to be positioned. Top of the tee, you're bladed, right hand over the top. Here David Lemieux finds himself in more or less equal positioning with Curtis Stevens, so he takes a hard step over to his left, disguised by the hook, and tries to land the right hand. He pushes Stevens out of position and tries to square him up even more with repeated left hooks, but Stevens holds firm and is able to set into position right there where they're in equal positioning more or less. He's able to crack Lemieux, who tries once again, but this time uses the left hook to push himself off and re-establish advantageous positioning. So at this point right now, he is the stem of the T, so he attacks. After he lunges in with that big shot, he finds himself a little in too deep, so he uses, Lemieux that is, a probing jab on Curtis's shoulder to try to keep him square, keep him occupied as he re-establishes advantageous position, the stem of the T, but Curtis realizes what's going on and gets out of there. Being the stem of the T is oftentimes a lot easier to achieve if you're able to take advantage of your opponent's poor footwork and put him on the ropes. So here David Lemieux once again takes that hard step over to the left, positions his opponent into the right hand with a punch and a follow-up control. He's the stem of the T, right? There he's controlling him to keep him square and remain as the stem of the T himself. So he uses a combination of punching and controls to keep Stevens square on the ropes while himself again remaining bladed. But this happens almost every single time the aggressive fighter, who supposedly doesn't have any skill, puts the virtuoso on the ropes. He's winning the positioning battle while the other guy is getting credit for beautiful boxing, right? Like Shakur Stevenson getting pounded by Zepeda on the ropes over and over and over again and losing that fight, losing many rounds in that fight, right? He was the beautiful boxer and Zepeda was just a basic come forward, whatever the hell you want to call him, right? The guy was clearly winning the positioning battle by keeping his opponent square on the ropes and being the stem to the T that he himself created.
A good left hook to the body by Lemieux. Perfectly.
From the inside range or the distance where a jab wouldn't be applicable, the same concept of the T advantageous position applies, only in reverse. Now you want to be the top of the T. Being the top of the T means you're able to strike with either hand, typically including a rear hand.
There we entered the portion of the video, great video by the way, I really enjoyed it, where there were no old school fighters featured at all. Probably because they didn't know how to do any of this. And neither did Lemieux, or at the very least I've never seen it. But he did find himself in positions where he could have maybe done something like this had his feet been quick enough or he had the know-how. But he found other solutions that we're just going to look at very briefly. Here Lemieux had the opportunity to step around Curtis to the left and become the top of the T, but instead he decided to push Curtis back, square him up, and become the stem to the T, with Curtis being the top. Still, the art of positioning is not lost on David Lemieux as he follows Curtis out, maintaining advantageous positioning, staying bladed while keeping him square with these probes and taking advantage right there. Here Lemieux had another opportunity to step around Curtis to the right, but instead chose to step out also to the right, showing you that he understands positioning, in this case, defensive positioning.
The last tactic to gain advantageous positioning I'll talk about is through disengagements, aka stepping out of range and away from equal positioning. You're also signaling a retreat, often prompting or forcing your opponent to match the step to gain back equal positioning. There's a moment where you have completed the full step back before your opponent has stepped forward, in which you are completely set in stance while your opponent is not set and typically has one foot up, which makes him heavier on the other. No matter what footwork maneuver they use to close the gap, if they aren't careful, they'll be vulnerable stepping into equal positioning. This is your window of opportunity to make reads, then eventually strike. Second form of the disengagement trap is lateral or sideways movement as opposed to forward and backward. The movement puts pressure on the opponent to chase or stalk the fighter moving laterally, allowing the mover to control positioning and decide when and where the engagement takes place if the stalker isn't properly cutting off the ring, which is commonplace in this era.
Had to go there, just couldn't help yourself. Had to poo-poo this current era, even though when you're showing us these techniques, it's all fighters from the current era. That's incoherent, bro. Not only are you providing zero evidence for some of these statements, the evidence that you do provide actually contradicts what it is that you're saying. When the simple truth is that in every era, there are fighters who are better than other fighters when it comes to positioning, let's say. So in every era, you're going to have a guy who is better able to position himself while moving back. And then in some fights, you're going to have guys positioning themselves better while moving forward. So you're going to see guys cutting off the ring and you're going to see guys getting walked into traps. Let's say all the boxers today are able to meet all of Boxing Gems' expectations. They're all perfect fighters. They could always position themselves properly. They could cut the ring off while walking their opponents into traps, right? Everybody's basically the same fighter. They're all equal. They have all the skill all the time. Where you're going to end up is going to be a boxing world of equal positioning where everybody's in front of everybody at all times and going 50-50 all the damn time. What you're going to see is rock'em sock'em and none of this beautiful skill that you expect these fighters to showcase. You see how incoherent that is?
But sometimes a surprise element of the strong side angle change mixed with high-level skills like controls can still work, but there is much more risk involved.
So just because Boxing Gems uses two southpaws versus orthodox fighters to demonstrate this technique, that doesn't mean that two orthodox guys can't find themselves squared up on the inside against one another, right? Still, for a southpaw to consciously put himself square like that against an orthodox opponent takes at least one more step, so it's more advanced. But the goal of, and the problem with that technique is finding yourself on the inside squared up to your opponent deliberately. And David Lemieux certainly does that too. So with 13 seconds left in the round, David Lemieux lunges in with the big right hand, misses, and finds himself squared up against his opponent. So David finds himself in equal positioning, but he shows you that he understands this isn't a very good idea necessarily. He probes as he gets back into his boxing stance. Here again, David lunges in with the right hand and finds himself square on the inside against his opponent, moves his left hook out the way, and lands his own. So here in this situation, you see the risk that Boxing Gems is talking about and a high-level technique used to avert some of the danger. Hooking with a hooker from equal positioning, you gotta do a little bit of something extra to not get knocked out and get the knockout of the year.
Let's bring back more skill in boxing. Why be equal when you could be above?
Sure. So I purposely used the guy that's considered lower level in boxing in order to show you that there is no lack of skill problem in boxing. The problem is that boxing fans choose not to recognize skill when it's right there in front of them.